Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're continuing our season preview series, one podcast for all 16 teams around the SEC. This is the sixth one we've recorded. We've already done Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Texas, Tennessee, and South Carolina. It's pretty close to about as good as I'm going to be able to do on that, Mark. I'm going to have to stop rattling them off at the beginning of every episode.
You have to read them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have to put a script together. But moral of the story, we've already put 5 episodes out, so go check those out if you've not already listened to them. Plenty more to come, so feel free to join us on this ride and go through all 16 teams with us. We'd be honored if you do so. This episode, we're going to talk about the Ole Miss Rebels. And we have to start, Mark, with the way last season ended. Because I get that there's a little bit of scar tissue with Ole Miss when it comes to postseason and losing at home in the postseason. And, as it turns out, winning a national title doesn't just totally fix the way a fan base feels about those losses in the postseason. But my argument I would make, Mark, is that this was different.
Oh, yeah.
This was not losing on the Monday of a regional against Tennessee Tech when Tennessee Tech had to pitch an outfielder because they were out of guys that were at their actual pitchers. This to me was different for a couple of reasons. One is clearly Murray State was just because Murray State then went and won a super regional, right? Like this wasn't like Murray State went to Durham and got blown off the field by Duke. And it was just like, well, that was just one weekend. It was clearly a team that was old. It was poised. They were talented and they were playing their best baseball. So that's one thing. The other is that Ole Miss team fought. Like they got down whatever it was in that regional final against Murray State. I forget what it was at its worst. And they came roaring back and it just came up short.
Yeah. And it looked like they were going to win too. I mean,
100%.
They had all the momentum. Yeah.
100%. Murray State escaped by its fingernails, and that's all she wrote. But to me, that was different than some of the other, throughout history, some of the other Ole Miss postseason exits at home where it just felt like they went out with a whimper. This was not that. Are you disappointed if you're Ole Miss and you lose it to a team that you think you should beat like Murray State? Yes, of course. But at the same time, this was a team that fought right down to the end, and they just got beat by a team that was better that weekend. For that weekend, you play that 100 times, Ole Miss is going to win most of the games. But for one weekend, Murray State was the better team, and I think that's the reality of it. So I get the disappointment, but Mark, I don't see it as being an extension of the disappointment that Ole Miss has experienced before. Now, it's easy for me to say because I'm not an Ole Miss fan the way those fans are, but it does feel different to me, and I'm curious what your take is here.
Well, I think you start with expectations, and Ole Miss entered last year predicted pretty low in the SEC. Mike's coaching for his job, and by the end of it, you're hosting a regional. You make a run to the SEC tournament final. You beat a really good Auburn team the last weekend. I mean, that was a team that really it was 3 or 4 weeks in May there where it just really clicked, and they were able to ride that, and that made the season a success. You think about where you start and you think about where you end, and the journey along the way. Ole Miss had a lot of fun, and that's kind of what this was about is being able to exceed expectations. Now the question becomes, because Ole Miss did lose quite a few of the key players off that team. Can you build on that momentum? Can you plug those gaps? Can you ride the experienced guys that you have? And there are some, we'll get to that in a minute. Some of the most experienced players in the conference Ole Miss has. What does that look like? Because looking at it just at the roster, it looks kind of similar to last year from a talent standpoint. I don't know how they compare to the rest of the conference. If you're gonna, most people aren't going to have Ole Miss in the top half of the predicted finish, but they didn't last year either. And this was a team that believed, and they were able to get the clutch hit. They were able to do the little things, and then and get some confidence. And as a result of that, in May they were a team you didn't really want to play. So that's what made the whole Murray State thing even more shocking, because it certainly looked like Ole Miss was a team destined, for Omaha, or at least a super regional. So now you look at this and you got Hunter Elliott, who's back, uh, one of the aces of the College World Series title team, could have gone to pro ball, very advanced left-hander, gives them at least an even um, edge every Friday. In most cases, they're going to have a decided advantage. So that's huge, because there's very few aces out there that, especially with his track record. So I do feel like, because of that, and because of the older position group that they have, much like last year, that this is a team they're going to be in every game. They're going to have a chance to win series, and it's just, do they get the breaks that they were able to get at times last year to put them over the hump, so they can get right back in that hosting, or at least the hosting bubble, so that you're playing meaningful games in May.
What I like most about this team is a position player group. You alluded to it. That's where a lot of the experience
Mm-hmm.
is. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Austin Foley was maybe as surprising a position player
Yeah.
as there was in the SEC last year. A guy who ends up hitting 20 home runs for Ole Miss. But Will Furness, obviously an accomplished player. Judd Utermark, an accomplished player.
Yeah.
Frankly, just with his tools, a little bit surprised that Utermark didn't end up being drafted in a place where he
Same.
ends up signing,
Yeah.
just because he is such a physical
Unicorn.
talent.
Yeah.
Right, 100%, 100%. And then if you want to bet on some upside, Hayden Federico showed
Yeah.
some flashes last year, but just kind of wore down as the season went on, and felt like maybe he got found out a little bit by SEC pitching. And now, how does
Mm-hmm.
he adjust to the adjustments? Right, that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
the question there. An interesting piece for me, though, is Dom Decker. Now, he was on
Yeah.
that Murray State team that beat Ole Miss last year, which I just kind of find funny that
Mm-hmm.
Ole Miss is like, you know what, we'll take one of those.
I
Give
guess
you
he
know,
enjoyed the atmosphere for the regional, right?
right,
Why wouldn't you? It,
exactly.
it was it was
How could
nuts.
how could he
Right.
not?
Right.
But there's still a decent amount. I say that because there's still a decent amount of swing and miss in this lineup. Like Judd
Mm-hmm.
Utermark's just going to have some swing and miss. Austin Foley's going to have some swing and miss.
Yeah.
Tristan Bassetta, if he's in the lineup every day, he's going to have some, on and on and on. But Dom Decker doesn't. He's someone who
Mm-hmm.
has a really low chase rate. I think it was 8% last year, which is extremely low. He's going to take some walks. He's going to work
Mm-hmm.
counts. He's going to ultimately put the ball in play. And in a lineup where you're going to have some swing and miss, and we saw it last year again, that was one of the things that hurt them against Murray State in the regional final. It was a lot of home runs, a lot of hard hit balls, but there were also a lot of strikeouts at key moments
Yeah.
where it was just the
That's a
ball
good
was
point.
not being put in play. And
Mm-hmm.
one guy's not going to fix that. Like Dom Decker's not going to come in and make their team immediately just, put the ball in play, hit and run type of team. But it does make it a little bit better, I think. So he, to me, strikes me as a key piece of the puzzle here, because he can bring an element that we don't see in their lineup any other place, with the exception of possibly Braden Randall, a veteran who's trying to elbow his way into the lineup after a couple of years as a part-time player. And in a lineup that's going to have a lot of power, just flatly is
Yeah.
going to have a ton of power. Someone that provides a little bit of a wrinkle there, I think, can make a big difference.
Yeah. I think one of the questions for me with Ole Miss is, I really like their starting nine, maybe 10 guys. It's just, what happens if you have injuries, if you have slumps? Uh, do you have a freshman who's going to emerge and just elbow his way into the lineup? That I think that for me is something that we still need to determine. Um, and I think the other part is, what does Cade Townsend look like after really finished strong a year ago, had a great outing in Hoover? Is he ready to step in and be a weekend guy behind Elliott? And then what does it look like, after him, assuming he's the Saturday guy, which is what's being projected at the moment? I mean, is it, you got a whole bunch of potential, from transfers, like Will Libbert, who is at Mizzou, right? How does he pitch in his new environment? Or is Hudson Calhoun the guy? He's a guy who threw some last year, but this would be a much bigger role for him. And then, you've got some other transfers that could be in the mix. I mean, Owen Kelly from St. Louis could be a guy that steps in and gets it. Who's the guy from San Diego State? Marco
Marco
Cipolla?
Sapila. Yeah.
Sapila. Okay,
Yeah.
good. So he's a guy that could get in there as well. An experienced pitcher who's coming in. So I guess after Elliott, there are some questions, on the mound, and unlike last year, where Ole Miss rolled out the same three guys every weekend, right? That's such a rarity. This year, I wouldn't expect that. Um, I do think there's going to be a little more volatility as they figure out the best trio.
Yeah, something tells me it's not going to be the same three guys every single week this time
Mm-hmm.
around. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be the case with them. And to me, it's the biggest difference between the biggest difference in certainty between
Mm-hmm.
your first guy and everybody else.
Right.
Because Hunter Elliott, you know what you're going to get. He's proven at this level. He proved last year that he's healthy and was the same guy, and maybe was a little better in some regards. So
Mm-hmm.
you feel really good about that. But you're right. Everybody else after them is some version of, you know, proven in a lesser role, but not proven in as big a role. A transfer that has dealt with injury in the case of Libert, or just
Mm-hmm.
not doing it at the highest level, like Owen Kelly. And
Mm-hmm.
then in the back of the bullpen, they're probably going to be leaning on Landon Koenig from North
Yeah.
Dakota State to throw big innings, and that's obviously a massive jump there. And I want to highlight, you highlighted Townsend. I think that's one of the right guys to highlight. I'll also say when it comes to Will Libert that he's someone where you have to look past the ERA to really get to the core of what he can be as a pitcher. Because if you look at the peripheral numbers, he was pretty good last year at Missouri,
Yeah.
and that was him coming off of an injury. So if you want to be optimistic about it, and I think in life it's a good thing to try to be optimistic when you can. Second year off of an injury, should be a little bit stronger, should have
Yeah.
his legs under him a little, metaphorically speaking, his legs under him a little bit better. And then
Lost the book.
and last
Yeah.
year, yeah, and last year he was just put in a tough spot. We talked on the South Carolina episode about Jake McCoy and having to go out there and take the ball 14 times, even though he wasn't quite ready for the role he was in. I think there's a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
similar thing with Will Libert coming off an injury with a team that really wasn't competitive at Missouri for the most part, and just continually asking him to go out there and try to be like the guy was a tough assignment. He's not going to be
Mm-hmm.
asked to be that at Ole Miss, and the stuff is really good. So if you're looking for, again, I like the lineup best, but I'm also pretty optimistic about a rotation almost that if that involves Elliott and Townsend and Libert in
Yeah.
particular. Those are three guys I'm really excited about. You're right to highlight the depth, but I do think those three guys in particular provide a lot of optimism for what they could do in the rotation.
I think there's more upside. Certainly, you don't have the consistency that Maddox and Nichols provided, but definitely, I mean, if Townsend and Libert pitch up to their capability, that could be a really good rotation, and you'd have that left mix. I mean, it could present some real problems. I do wonder pitching depth. What is that going to look like? You mentioned Koenig at the end of the game. I really like his when I did the fall report on Ole Miss and talking to Mike. I mean, he couldn't say enough good things about the potential that Koenig could give you. He just kind of had that closer swagger to him and the stuff to match. So he's still got to do it, and it's a big jump from North Dakota State to the SEC. And I feel like if that lands, then that's another key piece to this whole thing. And then finding some guys around him to pitch in high leverage situations. That's another question I have. I think the other thing I would point out with them is defensively. I think they were okay last year. You had some guys that didn't have a lot of range. They made the plays that they got to. Uh, what is that? Is that different this year? Is that improved? I think Udermark's going to slide over to third. Last year, he was the world's largest second baseman. Now, Decker's projected to play second, so Udermark's back to third, and that's more of a traditional spot for a guy of his size. Uh, but is the defense better? Certainly, they weren't. That wasn't a problem. I wouldn't say last year, but I don't think they were the rangiest team, and I don't know that they project to be that this year, but that remains to be. That we'll look and see what. I'll actually see them some opening weekend. I think weather permitting. I'll be there on Sunday, So eager to get a look at the Rebels.
The defense is a good thing to bring up, and I think this is where the pitching staff can help them out a little bit, because I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look to me like a team that defensively is going to light the world on fire, and I mean that
No.
in a positive way. But maybe if the pitching staff is what we think it can be, they probably won't need it as much, because that's what stands out to me about last
Mm-hmm.
year's, particularly in the rotation, is it was, the guys that could miss some bats, but not guys who are really blowing anybody away. Even Elliott is not the biggest strikeout guy in the world, and so the
Mm-hmm.
ball was just in play a lot. And I think with this pitching staff, the upside of it at least is such that the ball should be in play a little bit less. And so I think if you're Ole Miss, you're hopeful that that is the case, and it does take a little bit of pressure off of the defense. But obviously, we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Mark, where I would end it is this feels like a very, and I'll get your take on this for us to wrap up. It feels like a very similar team to what we saw last year, and I don't mean that in
Yeah.
necessarily a bad or a good or bad way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just is. It feels like a team built somewhat similarly. They've got some questions in some different places. They're a little more solid than last year in some places, but I think it kind of nets out to being a team that the expectation obviously is now higher because we've seen them do it.
Right.
But it feels like a team that feels pretty similar to what we saw last season.
Yeah. I mean, I think their floor is a regional team.
I would
That's
agree.
where I think this team is, and I think the ceiling will depend on those arms that we talked about. How much better do they improve, and also just offensively, the transfers, how they're able to come in. Does that Ole Miss lineup that hit so many home runs a year ago, is it, do you have something similar, or do you take a step back? Because I don't think their margin for error is going to be real big. No one's really is, but they're not just uber talented. So they're going to need guys. They're going to need to hit on their transfers. They're going to need to have the right elevation from their young talented players in order to make this all work.
I think that's exactly right. One of the reasons why I'm excited to see them. You'll see them early on, like you mentioned. I'll be
Yeah,
interested to hear your takes there. And obviously, once they get into the gauntlet that is SEC play, we will learn a whole heck of a lot more about them.
no doubt.
That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. This was the next in our long line of SEC preview episodes. We will have one for all 16 teams in the SEC. We're barreling towards the halfway point of this project, but if you've not done so, please go check out the episodes that are already out. One more time: Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Texas, Tennessee, and South Carolina already out. We move forward with starting with Oklahoma after this episode, and we invite you to stay with us along this ride all the way up until opening day. I want to thank Mark, as always, for joining me. I want to thank you, the listeners, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.